A man is officially declared dead in another city. The file is closed. The system moves on. But 5 years later, inspectors tear up a bedroom floor and uncover a body buried beneath his ex-wife's room. No investigation. No alarms. No justice. And the moment police realized what the records had missed, everything collapsed. Before you scroll, before you click away, listen to this carefully, because this story challenges everything we think we know about closure, distance, and the finality of death. A man officially died in one city. His funeral was held there. His name was written into public records. And yet, 5 years later, his body was discovered beneath the bedroom floor of the woman who divorced him 9 years earlier. If you think you've heard every true crime twist, this case will test that belief. Tonight's story is not about a missing person. It is about a man who was already declared dead, and somehow still hidden. As you watch, pay attention to every detail, every timeline, every quiet decision. Because what starts as a routine property inspection slowly unravels into one of the most disturbing domestic secrets imaginable. If you want more deep-dive true crime stories that focus on psychology, hidden motives, and real-world investigative failures, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay to the end, because the final chapter raises a question that investigators still can't fully answer. This is the story of Mara Bellwood and the body beneath her room. Mara Bellwood bought the narrow 2-story home on Larchmere Street 3 years after her divorce was finalized. The separation from her ex-husband, Daniel Cross, had been quiet on paper and bitter behind closed doors. No court drama. No public accusations. Just signatures and silence. By the time Daniel died in another city 4 years later, Mara had already rebuilt her life. At least, that's what everyone believed. The house was old. The floorboards groaned at night. Pipes rattled through the walls like something shifting in its sleep. Neighbors joked that the building had a memory problem. Mara never laughed. She avoided the back bedroom, the smallest room in the house, even though it was the only one with good morning light. Instead, she used it for storage and locked the door whenever guests came over. To friends, she blamed allergies. To contractors, she said the floor was unstable. But what no one realized, not the neighbors, not the repair crews, not even the city housing inspector who visited twice, was that 5 years after Daniel's reported death, he was still closer to Mara than anyone could imagine. He had never really left the house at all. 9 years after the divorce, Daniel Cross re-entered Mara Bellwood's life in the quietest way possible, through a short phone call from a number she didn't recognize. A hospital administrator told her that Daniel had collapsed in a rented apartment nearly 400 miles away. Cardiac arrest. No signs of struggle. No suspicious injuries. He had been living alone, working temporary construction jobs, and keeping mostly to himself. Mara listened without interrupting. She did not cry. Records showed Daniel had registered under his real name. His driver's license matched. A co-worker identified him at the hospital. Within 48 hours, his death certificate was issued. The body was released to a low-cost funeral service. There was no viewing. No one questioned the speed. Daniel's distant cousin signed the paperwork. The cremation was scheduled, then quietly postponed after an administrative delay. A storage request was filed. A clerical note marked the case as closed pending transfer. To investigators, it was an unremarkable death. To Mara, it was confirmation that the past had finally buried itself. She told friends later that hearing about Daniel's death felt like closing a door that had been stuck for years. But what no document ever explained was why the door inside her own house never truly felt closed at all. The smallest bedroom in Mara Bellwood's house became a quiet mystery to anyone who spent enough time there. It sat at the far end of the hallway, tucked behind a warped wooden door that never fully aligned with its frame. The lock had been replaced twice in 5 years. Once after a break-in scare. Once, according to Mara, because the key kept sticking. No one ever slept in that room. When her sister visited for a weekend, Mara insisted the guests stay on the couch. When a friend suggested turning it into a home office, Mara changed the subject so abruptly it left the conversation hanging. Inside, the room was bare. No bed. No decorations. Only stacked boxes pushed against one wall and a thick, mismatched rug covering most of the floor. What drew attention, though, was the smell. It wasn't strong. It wasn't obvious. Just a faint, stale dampness that air fresheners never seemed to touch. A handyman once mentioned moisture beneath the floorboards. He recommended lifting a few planks to check for rot. Mara refused. She paid him in cash, thanked him quickly, and never called him back. For the next 5 years, that room remained untouched, sealed away like a mistake no one was meant to uncover. A room that, quietly, kept its secret perfectly. The inspection wasn't supposed to mean anything. A burst pipe in the neighboring unit had triggered a city-wide check of older buildings on Larchmere Street. Moisture readings. Structural safety. Basic compliance. When the inspector knocked on Mara Bellwood's door that morning, she almost didn't answer. She stood behind the entryway wall, listening to the polite, practiced knock echo through the narrow hallway. When she finally opened the door, her smile appeared too quickly, like she had rehearsed it. The inspector moved room to room with a digital meter, tapping walls, checking vents, making notes without looking up. Everything stayed calm. Until he reached the locked back bedroom. "I need access to all rooms," he said gently. Mara hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. Inside, the air felt heavier. The rug lay perfectly centered, its edges tucked tightly beneath the baseboards. The inspector crouched, pressed his meter against the floor, then frowned. The reading spiked. He knocked on the boards. The sound was wrong. Not hollow. Not solid. Muted. Layered. "There's something underneath here," he said. Mara's voice cracked when she answered. "It's probably old insulation." But even as she spoke, she was already backing toward the doorway, as if distance could stop what the floor was about to reveal. The inspector stopped the visit early. Not officially. Not in his report. He simply told Mara he needed a specialist to recheck the subfloor before approving the unit. 2 days later, a structural engineer arrived with a small cutting tool and a dust mask. Mara stood in the hallway, arms folded so tightly against her chest that her shoulders began to tremble. The first plank came up easily. The second didn't. When the blade finally cut through, the smell changed. It wasn't the damp, stale odor people had complained about for years. It was heavier. Older. The engineer froze. Beneath the boards was not insulation. It was soil. Dark, compacted soil packed into a shallow pit carved between the beams. And inside that pit, wrapped in plastic, duct tape, and decaying fabric, were human remains. The room went silent except for the low hum of the cutting tool still spinning in the engineer's hand. No one spoke. The call to the police was made from the hallway. Mara never tried to run. She lowered herself onto the floor beside the doorframe and stared straight ahead, as if the wall across from her could somehow protect her from what had finally surfaced. 5 years after a man had officially died. Someone had just found him again. Detectives sealed the house within an hour. Forensics worked carefully through the narrow bedroom, documenting every layer of plastic, tape, and fabric that had fused together over time. The remains were fragile. Much of what could identify the body had already been damaged by moisture and insects. But one detail changed everything. A partial dental structure remained intact. Within days, it matched the dental records of Daniel Cross, the same man who had officially died 5 years earlier in another city. The same man whose death certificate was still active in state records. The same man who had, on paper, already been buried. The police reopened a closed file that had never been considered suspicious. Investigators contacted the hospital listed on Daniel's death report. They reviewed intake logs, emergency calls, and the brief medical notes recorded that night. What they found was unsettling. The man pronounced dead had never undergone a full autopsy. His identification had relied on a single coworker and a wallet found in his clothing. The body was transferred quickly. Too quickly. And somewhere between that hospital room and the funeral service, the paper trail grew thin. Now detectives were facing an impossible question. If Daniel had been buried beneath Mara's floor, who, exactly, had died in that apartment 5 years earlier? And how did Mara Bellwood already seem to know the answer? When detectives finally interviewed Mara Bellwood, she asked for water before she asked for a lawyer. She sat perfectly still at the metal table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. They didn't start with the body. They started with the divorce. 9 years earlier, Mara and Daniel Cross had ended their marriage quietly, but neighbors remembered the months leading up to it clearly. The late-night shouting. The slammed doors. The police car that once parked outside the house without ever filing a report. Mara admitted the relationship had been volatile. She admitted Daniel had moved back into the house briefly after the divorce, claiming he had nowhere else to go. But she denied he ever stayed in the back bedroom. When detectives showed her a photo of the shallow pit beneath the floorboards, her expression barely changed. "I thought he left," she said softly. They asked her when she last saw Daniel alive. Mara hesitated, then gave a date. It was more than a year after the divorce. More than 4 years before his official death. And dangerously close to the time neighbors remembered hearing heavy construction noises coming from inside her house, late at night, for nearly a week straight. A detail no one had ever reported. Until now. Detectives traveled to the city listed on Daniel Cross's death certificate. What they found was not a crime scene. It was paperwork. A small emergency room log showed a man admitted late at night, unresponsive. No next of kin present. No personal phone recovered. Only a wallet and work boots placed into a clear plastic bag. The coworker who identified the body was interviewed again. This time, his certainty softened. He admitted he had only known Daniel for a few months. They worked short contracts. People came and went constantly. When police showed him a photo taken from Mara's wedding album, he stared at it for a long time. "I think that's him," he finally said. "Think." The funeral service confirmed something even more disturbing. The body that had arrived from the hospital was never cremated. A refrigeration failure had damaged several stored remains during that same week. A transfer error followed. A misfiled tag. The body listed as Daniel Cross was eventually released as an unclaimed individual and buried under a generic record. No fingerprints had ever been taken. No DNA had ever been collected. Officially, the city still believed Daniel had died there. But now, for the first time, investigators understood something terrifying. Daniel's second burial was real. His first one was only a mistake. Confronted with the corrected timeline, Mara finally spoke without being prompted. "It didn't happen the way people imagine," she said. "There was no sudden explosion of violence. No dramatic final argument. No single moment that felt like a breaking point. Daniel had come to the house late one night, months after the divorce. He said he only needed a place to stay. He said it would be temporary. He said he had nowhere else to go. For 2 weeks, he slept on the couch. For 2 weeks, the tension grew heavier than the walls around them. According to Mara, the fight happened over something small. A missing charger. A locked phone. A question she asked and immediately regretted. She told investigators Daniel became aggressive. She told them she panicked. She told them she pushed him. The fall happened near the hallway entrance to the back bedroom. His head struck the edge of the low door frame. She said he stopped moving almost instantly. Mara insisted she tried to wake him. She insisted she didn't mean to hurt him. But when morning came, she made a choice that would shape the next 9 years of her life. She didn't call for help. She reached for tools. And she closed the door. Mara never denied what she did. But she never used the word killed. She described the weeks that followed as mechanical, careful, quiet. She waited until neighbors left for work. She borrowed tools from a coworker and said she was fixing loose boards. She worked only at night, cutting into the thin space between beams, carving a shallow pit where no one would think to look. When it was done, she replaced the planks, rolled the rug back into place, and cleaned the hallway until the smell of detergent burned her hands. Then she went back to living. She changed jobs. She repainted the living room. She hosted birthday dinners. She told people she had finally moved on from a difficult marriage. And when she received the phone call years later telling her Daniel had died in another city, she accepted it without hesitation. Not because she believed it, but because it allowed her to stop looking over her shoulder. In court, prosecutors would argue that the false death record protected her longer than any plan ever could. A clerical failure, a mistaken identity, a closed file. But the truth had always been waiting beneath her feet. And eventually, every secret needs air. What makes this case so disturbing isn't only the hidden body. It's how easily systems failed. A rushed identification, a missing autopsy, a paperwork error that quietly erased the chance for real justice. If one name had been checked properly, if one fingerprint had been taken, if one person had slowed down for just a few minutes, this story might have ended years earlier. Instead, a woman lived for nearly a decade with a secret buried beneath her bedroom floor, while the world believed the man connected to it was already gone. So here's the real question for you. Was this a tragic accident followed by panic? Or a calculated decision protected by silence? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want more true crime deep dives that expose hidden timelines, investigative failures, and the psychological aftermath of ordinary people making irreversible choices, subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because the next story isn't about a body being hidden. It's about the warning signs everyone saw, and no one stopped.